Black feminist politics that I'll talk a little bit more about today, but it's really about caring for other people. We can keep each other safe, and I'll share more about that in a bit. I want to open today by reading a land acknowledgement that I wrote after watching Andrea Ritchie, who wrote a book with a woman named Miriam Kaba called No More Police, that I'm going to leave with you today. And I'll talk a little bit more about the book in a bit. But anyway, I watched Andrea Ritchie do this talk about 4 times, and the land acknowledgement she read came from the Baltimore Writing Project. And she was doing this talk to a group of people in a bookstore in Baltimore that had been doing this work inside of communities, and I'm going to share with you about this work, doing this work inside of the communities that are experiencing a great deal of violence in the wake of the uprising. You may recall seeing some of the things that were happening in Baltimore on your news screens at home. So I'm just incredibly moved by the work of those folks there, and I wanted to share this land acknowledgement that's definitely inspired by the Baltimore Writing Project. I acknowledge the indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, as the rightful and traditional protectors and caretakers of their native lands in what is known today as the United States. I recognize that as a homeowner in Portland, Oregon, I participate in the historical, ongoing, and violent legacy of land theft initiated by white colonialist settlers who first invaded the Pacific Northwest in the 17th century. Specifically, I've come to know that the Portland metro area rests on traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. I understand that indigenous people have created communities, summer encampments to harvest and enjoy the plentiful natural resources of the area for the last 11,000 years, all of whom shared this area through their relations, and whose descendants are thriving and resisting settler occupation. I also acknowledge my complicity in the historical, deliberate, and ongoing attempts by settlers and their systems of oppression to appropriate indigenous cultures, ignore or break treaties with sovereign native nations, and perpetuate, obfuscate, racist, and violent acts of political, social, economic, and ecological white supremacy. I further acknowledge the fundamental role that these colonialist acts have had and continue to play in the historical and contemporary disenfranchisement, surveillance, and harm of Black Americans. Recognizing these intertwining injustices, I intend this land acknowledgement today to serve as an opening to contemplate the continuing resistance to colonial indoctrination through various indigenous and Black movements for identity, freedom, and self-determination. I commit my efforts to ending Black racism, anti-Black racism, modern colonialism, and white supremacy, and to creating equitable relations that honor and heal communities in the land. I further advocate for the ecological, relational, social, and political restoration and healing through the return of native and indigenous lands to their sovereign and rightful stewards. I have some cards, and I'm going to go to them at some point.
We're going to do an offering and then the
offering.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Thank the Lord for that.
Thank you, Kaki. The fellowship and its work in the community is funded by us, by the generous contributions of members and friends. So now is the time for our offering. You'll notice that the baskets are divided in two, so you're invited to give to support the work of this congregation, or to support the charity of the quarter, which is Juliet's House, a center for responding to the needs of abused children. As the baskets come by, I invite you, as you are able, to contribute with joy to either part of the basket or to both.
I wonder why I always dress in black, why you never see bright colors on my back, and why does my appearance seem to have a somber tone? Well, there's a reason for the things that I have on. I wear the black for the poor and the beaten down, living in the hopeless, hungry side of town. I wear it for the prisoner who has long paid for his crime, but is there because he's a victim of the times. I wear it for the sick and the lonely old, for the reckless ones whose bad trip left them cold. I wear the black in mourning for the lives that could have been. Each week we lose 100 fine young men. And I wear it for the thousands who have died, believing that the Lord is on their side. I wear it for another 100,000 who have died, believing that we all are on their side. Well, there's things that never will be right, I know. Things need changing everywhere you go. But till we start to make a move to make a few things right, you'll never see me wear a suit of white. Oh, I'd love to wear a rainbow every day, tell the world that everything's okay. But I'll try to carry off a little darkness on my back till things are brighter and man in black.
Thank you so much for that song. So I wanted to speak to you for a minute from my heart. Put my notes aside. It's so clear being in this room. I just want to acknowledge that how safe I feel. You know, my mother is a part of your congregation. This is the second time that I've had the privilege of speaking to you. My sister is here with her youngest son. My wife is in the audience. There's several faces that I've had the privilege, great privilege, of spending celebratory meals with. I feel incredibly safe in this space, and that hasn't always been the case. When I was a kid, I wasn't safe at home, and there was sexual violence in my house. And it wasn't something that my mother was really aware of. There was a level of pretense, I guess you call it, in the air. Normative, white normativity, I've come to understand. Structures that exist, polities, right? Am I acting the right way? Am I doing the right thing? And we get so caught up in that all the time that sometimes we don't notice. You know, when they talk about, sexual violence in the home, is often people that we know and we trust, and it's a symptom of a much larger issue, a much larger disease inside of our culture, and I think that has to do with our feelings about safety. So I just am coming to you today to share a little bit with you about safety. I'm one of your own, returning back to you. I've found the words to be able to say to you, the police don't work to keep us safe. I've been working for 25 years running homeless shelters. I've been the director of the Homeless and Outreach Department of San Francisco, one of the largest populations of homeless people in the world, working side by side with the police to try and help. We had different ideas, me and those police. I had an idea about human beings being the most important thing, and that government should be set up in such a way to cherish the light that human beings can find within themselves. That should be the most important thing, that we provide everyone with what they need so that they can find that light. When I got here today with my cards and all my speech preparation ready to go, I came in and I met Brian Jessup. And I hadn't met, we may have met before, I don't know, but I hadn't really connected with Brian. The first thing he shared with me was that he did his seminary in a prison called Vacaville down in California, and that he was there in 1983 doing that seminary. And I looked at Brian and I told him in 1983, I was on a sailboat with a 43-year-old smuggler that I'd met on the waterfront in San Francisco that I decided to leave home with. As we were going through some of the readings this morning, the chant, Ada Satya, Jugada Satya, Habe Satya, Nanaka Hosi Be Satya, I realized that as a child, that light was what I was seeking when I left home at 10. My mom had the light, and she was doing her thing with all the people in Mill Valley and Est and the Enlightenment thing, but I wasn't really feeling it. I was in a shadow somewhere getting hurt. I was attracted to junkies and sex workers down on the waterfront because there was a sense of authenticity that I wasn't finding at home. There was a type of honesty and transparency on the streets. I knew where I stood, and I was attracted to that type of honesty. I was attracted to that type of justice that I could see and touch and feel. So that's where I was in 83. And funny thing though, I ended up coming into a place when I was 25 years old. My addiction was arrested. I was a sex worker. I was a junkie. I lived amongst junkies and sex workers. I came in off the streets and I became of service to my people right away in a residential treatment center as a counselor and so forth. I did that work for 8 years with my people, healing, taking that light that I had found, helping others find that light, coming closer and closer to the realization that that light was there in the beginning. It's been true throughout the ages, and it's true here and now. And that when we touch that light, there's no greater teacher than the brightness that shines through us. Just like in a minute, everything becomes clear when you're coming from a place of love. And so in those communities, I continued to organize and amass power, and so we could tell our story and help other people that had power and privilege, that were doing good things and wanted for us all to be safe together. If we could just tell our story, we could all unite. And I got a master's in public policy, and I tried to do that inside of government. And I got hurt terribly badly when I realized that the government is not set up in such a way to support these ideologies that I'm sharing with you now. And so I'm returning back to you here at the church. I'm not the most church-going person. I don't often get up at 8 o'clock or 7:30 on a Sunday. But I am so thankful that you're still here. I'm so thankful that you guys are still here, Mama, gathering together, that I can come and share with you this truth. And I want to take this minute to read the voice to you of Marian Kaba. She's one of the women of color who have been organizing along. I'm in my scene. She's over in Baltimore. She started in Brooklyn in 2006, Project NIA, an organization to try and create abolition with youth. Can we all just agree that, she says, right? Can we all just agree that kids shouldn't be put in cages. This is simple thought. Do we have the capacity to take care of our youth together in a way where we can feed them and give them a home and love without putting them in a cage? All right, I digress. Miriam Kaba, I want to tell you a little bit about, I came to talk to you about abolition. So I told you a little about why I'm here talking to you, right? So you understand where I'm carrying this message from. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, but first, before I dilute it any further, let me tell you what Miriam Kaba has to say about reclaiming safety. Contrary to this is Miriam Kaba's article. I've actually brought enough here to leave you all with one. So I'm going to read the first couple paragraphs here, and I'll leave you with the rest of it to ponder at your leisure. She wrote this on August 30th of 2022. Reclaiming safety. In our imaginations, we need to break the equation of policing and public safety. In our imaginations. I ask you to find that light, and this shouldn't be a far reach. Contrary to assumptions that abolitionists don't care about safety, we care a great deal about it. We recognize that safety is a basic human need. We think, talk, and strategize about it constantly in order to bring more of us closer to it. A commitment to creating genuine and lasting safety for all is what drives our desire to remake the world. Our organizing and advocacy towards a world free of policing is rooted in the reality that for many of us, the cops offer no solution to violence, and in fact are the killers, rapists, home invaders, and looters, destroyers of lives, families, and communities. They are what stands between us and the resources we need to ensure our collective safety and survival. Ultimately, achieving greater safety requires us to divest financially, ideologically, and emotionally from the violence of policing. That means speaking to and confronting fears arising from the basic human need for safety and survival, which are fueled by propaganda and social policy that offer police and the carceral state as the only possible way to meet those needs. Miriam goes on to give some examples of the questions that abolitionists ask of one another and in their communities as an act to creating conditions that would allow us to live in a world without prisons. I'm here today to invite you guys to embark on such a process. I'm asking that you take on this task as a main tenet, that you explore the possibility of reaching out to other UUs throughout the state to spread this gospel, to ally with organizations and people who are trying to create a world beyond prisons, that are imagining ways that we can collectively care for one another, providing the things that we need, that when there is harm, we ask ourselves a larger question about where that harm is coming from. Societal pressures, economic pressures, they're distributed along power lines, and violence is distributed along with them. When we collectively work with those among us that are experiencing the greatest threat from that system that's reinforcing the mechanisms that keep us under this illusion, together we can create a world beyond prisons. So I'm going to leave you all with this article here. I've got 30 of them here. I don't know if there's 30 people here, but they're going to be right here. Please grab one. All right. You know, when I got clean and I started working in service, I was very engaged with the system. I actually was part of an organization that built the first California Rehabilitation Center programming inside in custody. And I was sharing with Brian that for 8 years I worked in the facility, the residential facility, where people were sentenced after they completed their prison term. And their participation and treatment with me was a condition of their parole. And so for 8 years, I did this incredibly powerful spiritual work with people under the guise of under the threat of violence. And, you know, I'm in recovery from that. I'm part of my abolitionist work that I do today is healing from that. Through grace, in my position in the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing in San Francisco, I could see the nonprofit in the space that was acting in the deepest accordance with my spiritual truth. And that organization was TGIJP, TGI Justice Project. I would give you guys a spoiler alert, you're already benefactors. My plenary speech offering, the check you guys gave to me today was made out to TGI Justice Project. I've been volunteering there for about 4 years. I work at the pleasure of Miss Janetta Johnson. Miss Janetta is a Black trans woman that started working in service in San Francisco in the 90s at the Tenderloin AIDS Resource Center, where she was organizing support groups for Black women that were sex workers that were HIV positive. You know, Miss Janetta was hired at TGIJP by a woman named Miss Major Griffin Gracie. And Miss Major is a Black trans woman, and she happened to be hanging out at this bar in New York called Stonewall, where the police, as they are wont to do on a regular basis, terrorized the people that came to that bar because they were non-gender conforming and they did not conform to white heteronormative, white supremacist rules. So the cops would come in there on a daily basis and just beat the crap out of them and rape people and pull their pants down. And yeah, it was just incredible violence. If you'd like to know more about it, it's very well documented. But she was part of a group of women that stood up in 1969, and the Stonewall riots are credited as sort of the beginning of the gay pride movement. And now I'm a gender nonconforming person, and I'm married. And all of the freedoms that I have to be able to walk around in this world and have a marriage that's upheld by this system and all these privileges, these unearned privileges that I have, they're at the expense of Black trans women, the people who are at the front line experiencing the most violence from this system that we have. You imagine the way that this system manufactures and reproduces this violence. You know, think about the percentage that you know, people of color are born into specific geographic areas where they don't have access to clean drinking water, green space, education, right? And there's an incredible exponential factor on this destructive normative system that we all cling to for safety. When you put it into an area where there's incredible poverty and lack of resources, you find that people there's like a hyper-masculinity, a lot of violence, and you see folks growing up in a way where a small, effeminate boy is not really celebrated. And so, you know, I think about the women that I serve and growing up inside of that system, continuing to be themselves. Think about that chant we said. Ada sacha. Yugada sacha. Habe sacha. Nanako hosibe sacha. There's nothing I've ever witnessed in my life that's more profound than a human being that from the time they were a child continues to be their truth, despite the violence and rejection of their most beloved. It is with tremendous honor and privilege I stand before you today, not having been rejected by my mother, being able to be here in front of my sister who, we won't go there because I'll get distracted. But part of the story I want to tell you is that we had the choice, right? I had the choice about when I wanted to involve the cops in the sexual abuse that I experienced. I had the agency, and that was unearned privilege, and many people do not have that. So it's a war, it's a revolution, it's afoot. And our leaders are the people who have been fighting that fight from the very beginning. Miss Major hired Miss Janetta in 2000, I don't know, maybe 4, maybe 6, I can't remember the date, but I know that by 2012, Miss Janetta was, I read a newsletter. One of the things that TGI Justice Project uses to organize people is we create newsletters that go inside of the carceral complex. We do letter writing with people throughout the entire United States that are gender nonconforming. Today at TGIJP, there's campaigns that we've helped our community throughout the United States to run to free people. Blue Sky is actually working at TGIJP right now after serving double-digit decades or double-digit years in custody in a penitentiary that did not match their gender identity. Okay, get lost. But I do want to tell you more about abolition. A couple things. I served the pleasure of Miss Janetta. You know who she is. She's there. We just bought one last thing. No, I won't do it. Okay, so what am I talking to you about today is I want to tell you a couple things that are out of this book that I'm going to leave with you. I could talk for hours, but I know I'm getting close, so we're going to go with this. Here we go. The book is called No More Police. The book is it's a collection of wisdoms that brought to you by Andrea Ritchie and Miriam Kaba. As you can see on the cover art, maybe if you can't see, I'm going to tell those who can't see, the cover art shows a black human being with dreadlocks and a red sweater and yellow pants with their hand in the air and their finger pointed towards the heavens, and the words that say, "A case for abolition, no more police. Invest in communities, Black Lives Matter, defund police." I'm going to read you what Angela Davis has to say about this book. She's also another one of the matriarchs that I follow, an elder in this movement. Exploring movements to defund and abolish police through the lens of long legacies of Black feminist abolitionist organizing, No More Police offers an unflinching look at the traps that lie along the path to abolitionist futures and critical guidance for readers who want to be part of bringing them into being. And this timely and engaging book to the top of your reading list, Angela Y. Davis. So I'm leaving you with the book, and I'm leaving you with three copies of the discussion guide that goes along with the book. And I happen to know that you have someone amongst you that leads a great book group. That's my mom, for those of you who are watching from home. So what is the case for abolition? Let me ask you guys a question first. A little late to gauge the room, but one sentence, what is policing? Control. Anybody else? What is policing? One sentence. Anyone? Come on.
Protection of white property.
Ooh, that's from your Brian Jessup. Bless his heart. So we asked people when we're organizing that what we get is police are the armed protection of state interests. Police are a source of violence. Police equal violent enforcers of racialized capitalism. Police defend capitalism that creates crime. Police equals safety's negation. Police exist to enforce the existing relations of power and property. I'm hoping that when we talk about abolition, what we're really talking about is breaking the hold that the police have on our imagination. In Miriam Kaba's essay, she talks about asking folks like, you know, what is it that really makes you feel unsafe? Like, are you worried safe in this room? Are you, or at home? Are you worried about a mass shooting? Are you worried about somebody coming to your house? What is the thing? And then think through how the police have responded with loved ones you may know who have been in those situations, and if they made anything better. You know, what we find is that cops don't stop violence. And it turns out in this book I'm leaving you, there's tons of data in it. And most of the data is from the cops themselves. They know they don't decrease violence. For over 100 years, the police have been creating violence, and we have tried to create ways to reform that violence, but police are violence. That's what they are. Capitalism can't exist without police to enforce the behavior and keep a specific order. And the police can't exist without capitalism. Miriam Kaba talks about breaking one of the things we need to do to get out of this rut that we're in, this stuck place that we're in, is to break and interrogate the protection racket, she calls it. And she describes it like this. She says, imagine they came in and they took all your land, and then they enclosed all the resources so you can't get at them, and then they're making you pay to live on a little piece of land and having to work for a tiny wage. And then when you get stressed out and you're like, hey, but it doesn't feel safe out here. And then they're like, well, give us some more money and we'll make it safer. And so then you give them more money and it doesn't feel safer, and you try that a couple more times, and suddenly you're in a position where you don't have any money to make it safer for yourself or your friends because you've given it all to them, and you're in this space with them where you really don't have any more resources or any place to connect with your people anymore. Yeah. And the dichotomy that they're giving us about violence and police, it's a false dichotomy. Because the data that they give us to say, well, let's compare police to nothing. And we're not asking you to compare it to nothing. We know what works. Most of the people leading this work are survivors. I'm a survivor. I'm a survivor of sexual violence, state violence, sociological violence, right? Being put on me because as a kid I didn't look right in school and I got beat up by the boys because they couldn't tell whether I was a boy or a girl and whatnot. Yeah, lots of violence. Most of us leading this movement are survivors of violence. And we're not saying we don't want to be safe. We're just telling you the system's not working for us. 75% of people who experience sexual assault don't go to the police. The data shows 50%, but I'm here to tell you that there's another 25 that you don't even know about. I got a sister here who's a pro on it. What is it?
I think it's way more. I have people in my office all the time that don't go to the police. And frankly, I tell them, if it was me, I wouldn't.
So my sister was the U.S. attorney of the state of Oregon. And she made her life about trying to protect children through mechanisms provided by the state. So that's the path she took as a response to some of the things we experienced when we were kids. And I took this other path, where I went first and got high with all the people that were in pain. Because, yeah, we needed to for a minute. And yeah, I was a little young for that, but you know what? I accredit it with a lot of my ability to bear the emotion that I need to bear in order to stand before you today with this level of poise and love in my heart. Anyway, safety. We all want it. We're just here to tell you it ain't working the way it's coming down the pipe. In Baltimore, after the uprising, the community gathered together and they were so clear with the police force there about where the violence was coming from that the city council gave them what was called a consent decree. And I'm not going to speak too much on the specifics of that. Please look it up and learn more about it. I will tell you that what I know is that since that time, $110 million have been spent on police reforms in Baltimore. And there has been no increase in safety and no decrease in violence. But we sure do wonder what we could have done with that $110 million if it had gone into the community. Because I'm here to tell you that if people have housing and they have mental health services, if I'm facing violence and I can go to my home and close the door and turn a lock, that violence might just end right there. I'll tell you what, it sure as hell doesn't when I'm on the street and I don't have access to mental health, nor do the people around me, or treatment services, or food, or counseling, or the ability to meet with someone and soak in some hot water and just let our central nervous system come down from all the violence we've been experiencing. I'm looking for a clock, Brian. What do I got?
5 more minutes.
The thing that I found that I want to tell you about is that in all of this abolition, and please read the book and please discuss with each other, what does safety feel like to you? What I have to tell you is safety depends. It depends on your relationships with the people you love. It depends on if someone's going to come to interrupt violence when it's happening in your home. Is someone going to intervene on the conditions in your life that are leading you to hang out with people that want to be violent with you? Do you have people in your life that are going to intervene with you, that you have a loving enough relationship with, where your heart is open enough that you can be held accountable when you create harm? That's the most precious thing. For me, finding my light and nurturing that light and understanding that I'm one of many and that we're standing in a truth that was true in the beginning and it's been true throughout the ages and it's true here and now. And when you feel that truth and it's in your heart, it blasts you wide open. And the divinity of that light is the most profound teacher. I hope this message that I brought you today from the junkies and the sex workers of our world, because that's who I am. That's where I come from. And we keep us safe. I just want you to hear it. You know, Uvalde, Texas happened, and those cops did not keep anybody safe. That was not what they were there to do. Pulse nightclub shooting happened. Cops did not keep us safe. In fact, they created conditions where people were hurt. They couldn't escape the club. They did a lockdown around the facility. They created a militarized presence that made it more unsafe and people's lives were lost. Colorado, we keep us safe. The people inside the club, performers, a transgender person mislabeled in the media afterwards and all kinds of stuff. Forget all that. We kept us safe. We took the shooter down, not the cops. We've kept us safe for a long time. I invite you to join us. I know that the truth of this fellowship, I've seen the work through my mother. I've seen the power of coming together. This congregation, I know that at McMinnville, there's a tremendous battle afoot currently, just in the way that y'all are responding to folks who are unhoused in your midst. You're not alone. The last thing I'm leaving you with is a handout The handout is an organization that was started by Andrea Ritchie and Miriam Cobb. It's called Interrupt Criminalization. There's a website, there's tons of tools, there's tons of projects you can get involved in. Creating safe spaces for mental health, resisting all the efforts of indoctrination that colonization has that's permeated through all of our systems. There's toolkits here to help you understand where you can plug in, and I'll be here to join you whenever invited. Thank you so much for continuing to hold my family in your hearts, and creating this house of worship and this community, making yourself available for me to come and speak with you, and receiving me with such open hearts and graciousness. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kaki. You've touched our heart and you've given us a lot to think about. So we'll do some thinking right now. We'll just take a breath and sit in silence for a few moments.